For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson joins us now from Cape Town, South Africa. Good morning, Michael.
Morning. The Asia Pacific markets looking slightly up this morning, generally speaking. That's mainly because the Nasdaq did quite well yesterday in New York, which in turn means that the outlook for inflation appears to be slightly improving. In other words, the Fed managing to get over it. And that's the Chinese authorities have also been in contact with Moderna and Pfizer. Pfizer is saying it could start making its Pax COVID treatment in China in 3 to 4 months' time. And the fact that China is reopening, or appears to be reopening, could, for example, help adjacent economies or those that trade with it. For example, it could be adding 1% to Australia's GDP as well in 2019. 15.3% of all Australian imports came from China, and it could be also, as far as Australia is concerned, the return of international students as well. So they're quite looking forward to that and may boost their economy there. Pakistan has so far received $9 billion in pledges to help it in its flood relief system. 4.2 billion from the Islamic Development Bank, 2 billion from the World Bank. Also the US, the EU, the UK and China have agreed to help, but Pakistan is saying it's not enough, and it needs $16 billion and another $5.6 billion too. This has actually caused a lot of flurry in the international economic community because Pakistan has been saying part of the floods is the fault of the developed world and climate change, inflicting climate change deterioration on them. And the developed world is saying, actually, no, it's not. But that's the debate right now. But that is the response so far, $9 billion, and Pakistan is saying that's not enough. Let us go to the United States, and stock futures are relatively flat. I did mention that the Nasdaq was up yesterday. Tesla's up 6% today. The markets generally could be set for a 20% increase this year. A lot of that will depend right at the beginning on the CPI, the inflation data that we'll get on Thursday, which will probably give us some kind of indication of where the Fed's going. Another another president of the Fed, this is the San Francisco Fed, Mary Daly, has said she thinks that it's time that interest rate rises in the United States were limited to 0.25%. Disney, Bob Iger reinstated there, has been saying to the workers, look, back to the office 4 days a week, please. Well, he's actually not saying please, he's just saying back to the office. And that starts March the 1st. Slightly more strict than other companies, which tend to be still employing in the United States, at least this kind of hybrid system where you're allowed in the office, or you're asked to be in the office 2 to 3 days a week rather than the 4 that Disney is insisting on. But he's certainly cracking the whip. Let's turn our attention to Bern in Switzerland, where the central bank there took the wrong bet on the franc. And its biggest loss in its 116-year history, 143 billion over the 2022 financial year. However, inflation is still only 3% in Switzerland, and they're expecting the next interest rate rise to be 100 basis points to 2% later this year. Turning our attention to the UK now, tens of thousands of small businesses are predicted to fail as a result of government energy support cuts of up to 85%. Small businesses were dividing between them 5.5 billion. It's now down to it will be 5.5 billion, down from 18 billion. Bearing in mind the national debt is standing at 2.48 trillion. The government is saying you're lucky to get that. As far as I'm paraphrasing slightly, but that's what they're saying. The UK again, Rolls-Royce cars are definitely into overdrive. the sort of average customer model is now $500,000, and there's no question that, well, of course, it's owned by BMW now, but there's no question that the rich are getting richer, and they're not shy of splashing out on cars. The second biggest market, China, not doing too well, but still doing extremely well, if you see what I mean. Not doing too well compared with previous years. That may actually zoom back. In the UK, it's been reported that the Prime Minister has been in talks with SoftBank about their proposed flotation of ARM. Now, as you know, we've been following this. It was going to be in New York, but it may be that it could be in London. ARM is certainly the jewel in the crown of the UK tech industry, and SoftBank bought it for $32 billion in 2016. It was thought it would merge with NVIDIA, but antitrust legislation in the United States meant that didn't happen. So this is what Sunak's doing, is trying to attract ARM to float on the UK London Stock Exchange. And customers went to one of the cheaper supermarkets, flocked away from the likes of Sainsbury's and John Lewis, Waitrose and so on, and cash-strapped customers actually went to Lidl. 1.3 more customers they got. It's been calculated that the spending switched was something like £63 million, and Lidl itself saw a 24% rise in sales year on year. Some breaking news for you as far as the London-Brussels Northern Ireland Protocol trade deal is concerned. Apparently, there is better news about this. The precise details have not been released yet, but our Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, has been meeting Maroš Šefčovič, who's the European Union Vice President, and the talks have been quite cordial. They will begin again on January the 16th. And finally, as far as oil is concerned, moving slightly higher, import demands or import forecasts from China up about 3%. That's helping the import quotas up about 3%. That's helping the general view of where oil might well be exported into China. And generally speaking, of course, that's still, we're still discussing as to whether the global recession forecast by the IMF last week will actually crimp prices. But so far, 3% demand up in China, which is relatively good news for the oil price.
I mean, how are people banking on China when China is not showing signs of coming out? Obviously, China has bungled COVID, and most Western nations now are going through the possibility of shutting Chinese citizens for coming into their country, because it's a bedlam what is happening in China now. So how are people banking on China, to come back and stream and get production on when things are not any better?
It is whatever you say, and I agree with you, of course. It is the world's second largest economy, and Moderna and Pfizer, as I said to you in my earlier part of the report, are actually in talks for vaccine to actually go into the country, and Moderna could be producing it within 2 to 3 months. So, I mean, given that there is that basic halt in what's going on in China. Again, we don't know the true picture, but the hope is that demand will actually happen there. And when it does, it'll be quite quick, as it was post-pandemic in the rest of the world.
Right. Bob Iger, Disney returned to work, going back to work physically, hybrid working. When he came back in, late last year, he had said that he was going to restructure, and part of the changes he's making is that now staff have to come into work full-time as opposed to working from home. There's been that debate amongst employers and employees as to productivity of staff who work from home as, against those who come into the office 3 days a week or 5 days a week. I'd like to take your view on this. I know Elon Musk as well has asked Twitter staff to come back fully to work, and it looks like we're moving away from hybrid working.
He certainly has. I think, my gut instinct says that hybrid working sounds quite good. I'm not exactly sure that I would like to keep an eye on my workforce. I'd like to mix with the workforce, and I'd like to take note of their concerns. I'm not quite sure how you achieve that with hybrid working. And remember, 4 days a week is considered quite strict in the United States. As I said, the general thrust of things in the United States is hybrid working in the office 2 or 3 days a week instead of the 4. And Musk is totally different. He's saying, 7 days a week, isn't he? And will fire non-performing employees. That's an outlier, I think, as far as things are concerned. I don't think that that shows what's actually going on. But Bob Iger is no doubt cracking the whip, and I think he's quite right to do that as well. I know it's difficult, but I would prefer, in terms of being part of a management system, if I were, I'd like to keep an eye on my employees 5 days a week, five working days a week, mix among them, find out their concerns, find out what's going on. Don't just leave it to the water cooler or the occasional Zoom meeting.
Well, Michael, two things. The first is the breakthrough that has been reported in the talks with Brussels by the UK. James Cleverly, Foreign Secretary, and the Vice President of the European Commission met, and James Cleverly was saying,